Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Terumais Pedig Beis Halacha Aleph. We are going to be learning today Daf Yud Zayin, starting Mamish on top of the Amid, Daf Yud Zayin Amid Aleph. Let's quickly review. We had in the Mishnah the opening rule, which is that Ein Toidemin Min Hatohid Al Hatamei. You might have thought that if you have two piles of the same type of produce, from which you have to separate Truma Gedoyla. And the rule is that if they both belong to you, if they both are of the same quality, right? It's not inferior for superior. No, it's both the same quality, belongs to the same year, belongs to the same person. And min hamuka, if you are bringing them in close proximity, you would think, Gavaldik, if one is tahir and one is tameh, why not give to the kohen only from the tahir? Nevertheless, the rule of the Mishnah is that ein toidemin min hatohid al hatami. Quickly reviewing again, the Rambam understands this halacha to be, as the Gemara brings a pasuk, a actual midoiraisa lechatchila. It's a lechatchila doiraisa, because the Mishnah itself says that if one did min hatohid al hatami post facto ve'im tarmu, the Mishnah says trumas on truma, and then we have the Rash. Not the Rash Shirilio in the Yerushalmi, the Achrein, but the Rash, the Rishon, Rabbeinu Shimshon in Mishnayis, who says that really it's a rabbinic law, and the Gemara's pasuk is only an asmachta, and the logic behind it is that since you have to separate truma min hamukaf means min hasamuch loy. Samuch means you have to mamash put them together. If you're going to bring them together, you're going to actually create more truma. That's the reason behind it. And therefore, the Mishnah gives three exceptions. It's really one exception. The Mishnah gives three examples of the exception. If you have a pressed cake of figs that is partially tahar, partially tameh, they're anyways connected. They're anyways min hasamuch. Then you may give, or you must give, that we'll see today, min hatoid ala tameh. The second example of the Mishnah is that if you have a bundle of vegetables, they are already bundled together. Some of them tar, some of them are tameh, they're all tevel. You are allowed to give, perhaps you should give, min hatohid ala tameh. And the third example in the Mishnah is if you have a pile of grain and arema, again, it's already piled together. The kernels are touching each other. Some are tar, some are tameh. Then you may give min hatohid ala tameh. Another rule, that when do we say ein toirmin min hatohid ala tamei, only by truma gedoyla? But when it comes to trumas meiser, which normally would mean that the Levi receives the meiserishin, from which the Levi has to separate 10%, either called trumas meiser or meiser min ha-meiser, and that becomes bonafide trumas meiser. There, again, let's begin with the words may. The Levi may give min hatohid al hatamei, and let's keep on learning the understanding of the Rash, that the whole Isra is only midrabanan, and it's all based because of the rule of min hamukaf, and because we don't want to add to Tuma in Eretz Yisrael. Since Meiser Rishon does not need to be given min hamukaf, that's something that we learned already a few times, and the reason for that is because Truma has to be given by approximation. It's not allowed to be given exact. But when we want for the approximation to be approximately correct, we don't want to say, approximately, but I was completely off. And that's why when I separate truma from one pile for the other, we have to bring them in close proximity for the separator to see exactly what's there, for his 2% approximate to be a real approximate, a close approximate to the 2%. Masha'enke, when it comes to May Eser, Meiser is from 10. Meiser is not allowed to be given by approximation. Al tarbala aseru madois. You have to give Meiser exact. Prior to giving Meiser, you count exactly what you have. So therefore, you don't have to do min hamukaf. Since you don't have to do min hamukaf, there's no fear that you're going to add to Tuma. You're not bringing Tahir and Tommy together. They can be in two different piles. They can be in two different rooms. They can be in two different countries. And therefore, that's where we left off. You could, by Meiserishan, give bitoidem min hatoid alatame. Atkan, we learned on Daf Tezayin. And today we opened up with a very important question, and that is when we say that one may give, is it a may or is it a must? Perhaps since you are allowed to give min hatohid ala tamei, you have to give min hatohid ala tamei. Perhaps, again, we could say you don't have to. You can give min hatohid ala tohid, u min hatomei ala tomei. And actually, we'll see that it's a machlokes tanoim, whether it's only a may, you are allowed to, or whether you are chayiv to, whether you must, whether you are obligated to do so. Now, the rest of the daf is going to speak a lot about the three exceptions that we just spoke out. We're going to begin with the exception of the pressed cake of figs. Really, we already just mentioned it quickly when we learned the Mishnah. What do you mean some of the cake is tahor, some of it is tamei? Why would we not say that if some of it is tamei, all of it is tamei? Lamashal, if something tamei aviv touches a fig, but it touches the fig here, we don't say that the other end of the fig is tahor. Doesn't work that way, because the fig is one unit. If one part of it becomes tamei, automatically all of it becomes tamei. Evidently, the three cases of the Mishnah don't function that way. The biggest one that has to be explained is going to be the pressed cake of figs, because when it comes to a bundle of vegetables, I get it that you will put a string around them, but they're not mamish, they're not mechubar. When it comes to a pile of grain, they're not mechubar. And just to make it clear, that would mean that if a source of tamei, of tuma, touched one grain, you know what becomes tamei? Only that grain. I don't know, you have to really go back. We had the sugi in Psachim, right? The Rab Chananya, Skana Kahanim. I mean, every now and then we had in the end of Chagiga, the third chapter, every now and then we learned the sugyas of Tuma and Tara. And for those of us who are fortunate to learn the Rambam, we really learn about this once a year properly. First of all, Midai Raisa, Ein Oichel, Metama Oichel. Start with that. And even if we're going to go with Rabbinic Tuma, the most chulin could become Tamei. We don't paskin like Rabbi Kiva. We had him in Psachim. We paskin that if it's not Truma, the end of the line is a Sheni. So even if one grain becomes an Isha, and even if we're going to go that one grain somehow was Matama, its neighboring grains, it's only Matama the grains around it. You go from Rishain to Sheni, and that's the end of the line. So I get it by the pile that you can have a pile that there is Tuma in one part, and there's no Tuma in the other part. But by the pressed cake of figs, that's something that we're going to have to go into much more. We're going to learn a gavaldik rule that ein l'chadavar shemachaber ha'oichlin le'inyan tuma ela zayin mashkin bilvad. We're going to say what that means. We're going to learn today some basic dinim of tuma and tara, and ultimately that won't be the main focus of today. The main focus of today's daf will be to go into why did the Mishnah have to give three exceptions? Why would we not be able to extrapolate from one to the other? We're going to see that the three exceptions are much more than one might think. There's going to be a lot about that. And without any further ado, Chavre, it's going to be a Gavaldik Daf, again, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. The rule, Aviv, Haltkop, Freilach. I will tell you, have a coffee. I don't know if you can have a coffee still. We have Baruch Hashem, young Bachrim with us. So, in Brazil, they gave coffee in bottles to kids. I'm just saying, that's the minig of it. We're not in Brazil, we're in America. So by Truma Gedoyla, and that was the biggest novelty, even though many dinim are learned from Truma Smaiser, nevertheless, that's where we ended off. Some dinim that are hinted to in Truma Smaiser, Bechlal don't apply to Truma Smaiser. They only teach to Truma Gedoyla, but they don't apply to where it's written. So, Ein Toimin min hatohid alatame is only a rule for Truma Gedoyla. It's not a rule for my sedition. There, you may or you must. Let's go. Says the Gemara. We're beginning on top of the Amid. We, again, all of these different nuschos, and we are going to understand that we are quoting now a Braisa. Says the Braisa. Trumas Meiser niteles min hatohid al hatohid. Okay, see, he begins step by step by step by step. You're going to say, of course, of course, fine. And umin hatame al hatame, weiter, of course. In other words, let me word it this way. Superior for superior, inferior for inferior. And now, here we go. Umin hatoid al hatame. Here is where my sedition changes the road from Truma Gedoyla, not my sedition, Trumas Meiser, Truma gedoyla ein troidemen min hatoid alatame. By meiser rishon, yes, min hatoid alatame. However, in the opposite direction from tame for tar, never, because tame is inferior, really inferior. There's nothing the kohen can do with it, only then to burn it and to try to benefit from the fuel as heat, as a cooking fuel. But chabal, you have to burn it. The einon nitelas min hatome al hatoir, period. Okay. Now, the coin has to be told, of course, yeah. Now, Rab Nachem Yoimer Datanem, listen to his words, Kishem. Now, but just to make it clear, the Tanakama basically uses the words that our Mishnah uses, just in the opposite direction by Trumas Maisid. Nitelas doesn't mean it has to be taken. Nitelas means it may be taken. Okay. Rab Nachem Yoimer, Kishem she'ena niteles min hatome al hator, just like you may not, even by Trumas Maisid, take from Tome for Tor. Kach, listen to his words. Einoi niteles min hatome al hatome. You're not allowed to take min hatome al hatome. In other words, you can never separate Tome. So let me ask you a bomb question, Aviv. If I'm a Levi, let's say, I'm not a Levi, just for the record, but if I would be a Levi, I would have my sedition, or we already learned in this Masechta or in the previous Masechta that I forgot which Tana, that the owner, the Yisrael, prior to giving my sedition in the Yerushalmi, it's like a b'diavad. It's not ideal. If they went ahead and they said, listen, let's say I'm a Yisrael, I have to give you, Isaac is over here, Nisanol, I have to give you 10 apples. Let's just say, for my sedition. If I were to say, anyways, Nisanol cannot eat up to 10 apples, he's a Levi. You're going to have to give 1 apple to a Kohen. You know what? I'll do you a favor. I'm going to give you less work. I am going to already separate the apple, and I will choose which Kohen to give it to, and I'll give you the 9 apples, and I'll tell you here, you're good to go. If I did it, it's good. At least b'diavad. So whichever way. So if I cannot give minatomi alatomi, what should I do? Rab Nechemia says you cannot give minatomi alatomi. You know what that means? Now, I cannot eat, if I have tame produce, by the way, guys, chulin I can eat betuma. Tame produce prior to removing trumas or meiser is tevel. For me to be able to eat from it, I have to remove.
So why would you give?
So no, but if I can't give minatame alatame, so what should you do? It must be that the Rebbe is saying you have to give minatame alatame. You have to remove trumas meiser. You can't circumvent giving trumas. So when he says it's usur to give minatame alatame, even though he doesn't spell it out, basically he's saying, if the only solution is to give min hatohir al hatame, that means you have to give min hatohir al hatame. So here you have, the Tanakama doesn't say you have to. You may. Rabbi Nechemia holds you have to. In other words, it's like since you are allowed to, so then the next step is you're chayiv. And it makes sense. There's a logic. Because if you have such an option, why would you give a kohen something that he cannot benefit from? Says the Gemara, Umoide Rab Nechemia, that when it comes to Demai, I know it's spelled here with 2 yuds. Sechtas Demai is spelled with a Dalad Mem Aleph Yud. Don't confuse Demai with Dimua that we just learned about last week, please. Demai is going all the way back to the beginning, right? We had the Sechtas Demai. Demai means, Aviv, is that during the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, Rabbi Yechanan made a takana that unless there is a person that made a public declaration to be very observant when it comes to the laws of Tum and Tara, an ideal in the laws of Tum and Tara and in the laws of tithing, if one undertook both, he would be called a chaver, a bona fide chaver. Chaver means a friend, and we are all friends, but it means someone in whom I can really have all the friendship all the way. I can eat in your house. I don't have to be concerned about that you didn't tithe, that you're tamei. If a person was not known to be a chaver, there was a halachic presumption that some of the tithings were not done, not all of them. And therefore, one of the things that actually have to be separated is trumas meiser Meiser Rishon does not have to be given to the Levi. I don't want to go back to Demai, but by Demai, since the Trumas Meiser that has to be separated is only by a rabbinic decree, there you don't have to give min hatoid alatame. There he allows you to give min hatame alatame. But other than Demai, that means other when you have something that only has to be tithed from the outset, midrabanan, you're chayiv according to Rav Nechemia to give min hatoid alatame. Beautiful. Okay. Now, what happens? What happens if according to Rav Nechemia, if there is no tahir available? No. Only when you're chayiv to separate. A normal ma'aseh. So says the Gemara, at kedoin. I understand Rav Nechemia. Now, I know that the words oisa hamin and the way we are interpreting the words oisa hamin is not a perfect fit, but that's the way we will learn the Gemara. In other words, if I'm the owner, I'm a Levi, okay, Aviv. If I have apples that hator, I have apples that are tummy, they both have to have trumas ma'aser separated from it. Makes sense according to Rav Nechemia. Listen, since you are allowed to give min hatoid ala tamei, so you have to do it. But I have it. So if I have it, you can tell me I'm chayiv to do it. Question is, what happens if the Levi doesn't have tahor same type? That's chayiv to have trumas ma'aser removed from it. What are you telling me that the Levi has to acquire by? In other words, how far do we say the Levi must give? That's not clear if we only would have had the Baraisa that we started today's share with. But we will know his halacha, nishma'ino, will extrapolate it minadah from the following story. And in Yerushalmi, for those who are joining recently, we don't have the quantity of Agadah that we have in the Bavli. Almost all of the stories in the Yerushalmi so far, almost, not we had every now and then a little bit, was really about a halachic discussion and a story how a shayla came to a certain Rav and he said X, Y, and Z. It's like Shalas and Shuvas. That Rab Chanina, which Rab Chanina from Antoina'a once went with Rebbe Ze'era to the city of Hamas Gerar. And in that area, listen to what happened. Zavan lei Kiluskin. Rab Chanina bought for Rab Ze'era bread rolls, or instead of having it with a kuf, if you would put a gimel, by the geluska, yafa, right? Again, psachim today, I know it's coming up twice already. In other words, a Danish or a bread, a roll, and ba'a misakna miyom lechavre. Rab Ze'era did not consume all of it. He knew that he might be getting in the next days more rolls. He wasn't convinced that the rolls that he's getting later will always be tahar. The one that he just got right now from Rab Chanina, he knew was tahar. So he decided that he's going to save what he has now to be able to have tahar from which to separate what has to be separated. Look inside. In the medium-sized lines, the Pnei Moshe, 3 lines under the Gemara itself. In the medium-sized lines, Zavan Lei, this is Rab Chanina, bought for Rab Ze'era Kiluskin. Kana Rab Chanina b'shvil Rab Ze'era Geluska Achas. And this Geluska that he bought him today was Umin HaChaver Hu Shekana Oisa. He bought it from a chaver, meaning he knew that it was made betara. Elo Sheloi Hoya Mesuken. But it wasn't yet fully rectified. Now you can ask a question. Hold on. One of the rules is that ein chaver yoytze metachas yadu davar she'eina mesuken. So what do you mean? If he bought it from a chaver, it should already be fully tied. No, not true. So he reminds us. Ukamanda Omar li'el b'perigimel did the mai. We had such an opinion. The mutar limkor lechaver echad vadai. You can sell one chaver can sell to the other chaver, not the mai, something that is not mesuken, something that has to be tithed. As long as the seller tells the buyer this is vadai tevel, then he's allowed to do so. That was the case over there. And let's go back inside the Gemara and Amarle. Rab Chanina tells Rab Ze'era, Leis anan serichin chashashin liyichida. I don't know why you are saving the roll that I bought you. He understood. For you to have something that's, is tahar, because you're concerned. He understood. You're concerned that tomorrow and the next day, you might get food. The food that you might get might be tameh. You're going to have to separate from it trumas meiser. You're not going to have tahar. All of that is based on the shita of Reb Nechemia. Rabbi Chanina told him, I don't know why you're paskening like Rab Nechemia. In other words, you don't have to pasken like Rab Nechemia. You could pasken like the Tanakam of the Braisa that we began today's share, which is that even if you have tahar, you don't have to give from tahar ala tamei. Based on that, I certainly won't save tahar that is edible to have what to give Trumas Meiser for. Now, what do we see from this whole story? All Rab Chanina told him is, we don't pasken like Rab Nechemia. But at least we can extrapolate what Rab Nechemia holds. Rab Nechemia holds that not only must you give min hatoir ala tamei, when you have it, even if you don't have it, because Rab Ze'era should have eaten up a roll a day. But he already knew, but then what's going to be tomorrow? Tomorrow I might get tamei. And if I get tamei tomorrow, I won't have from what to separate Trumas Meiser from. So what? If you don't have it, do min hatamei ala tamei. Is that since Rab Ze'era was machmer like Rab Nechemia holds that even loy ma'osamin gewaldik. In other words, that's the words of the Gemara. Islach meimer b'shoyloi ma'osa hamin. No, that's not the case. No, but Kitsa, you see that even when you don't have anything available, if you were to pass like Rab Nechemia, you would be chayiv to find tahar, because you can only separate by Meiser Rishon min hatoir ala tamei. Beautiful. Okay, weiter. Be'emes amru. Then you would have to acquire it, yes. The word be'emes.
And there's no problem that it's not from the same batch, so to speak, because
it has to be from the same batch. What it has to be is just from the same year. Has to be from the same level of quality, inferior, superior. That's what it has to be. Very good. Now, one thing is very important, that, let me just go back. The rule by Truma, forget about Trumas Meiser, that ein toir min hatoir ala tamei, according to the Rambam, it's a din doiraisa. And therefore, when the Mishnah gave the three exceptions, right? The Mishnah begins by saying, Be'emes amru, Be'emes, even Be'emes generally means a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It fits, because if God was the one that said, like the Rambam says, that you're not allowed to give min hatoir ala tamei, only God can give exceptions. The problem, according to the Rash, according to the Risha in the Rash, that says that the whole din in the Mishnah, ein toir min hatoir ala tamei, is a din derabanan, based on the chashash, based on the min hamukaf rule. So there is a logical reason why we give the three exceptions, which is the way we'll be learning the Gemara. The words be'emes are difficult, and he himself says that be'emes, the Mishnah says these words. Be'emes means that just like when we have a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, no one debates it, so we can say be'emes, certain derabanan dikadinim, that's so logical. Chazal also sometimes borrowed the term, even though the whole din is a din derabanan, just to be aware of that. Okay, so here we have the be'emes amran again. The Mishnah gave three exceptions. The eagle, not the eagle in English. The eagle means a round pressed cake of figs, the bundle of vegetables, the pile of grain. If part of it is tamei, part of it is tamei, I am allowed to separate by truma gedoyla min hatoir ala tamei. So first of all, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, this is the Amoira, that kol makem shesheninu be'emes halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It makes it even more difficult according to the Rash. Why would the Gemara bring Rabbi Eliezer? From here it's mashma that it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Okay. Now, Igel Shaluvela. Shnitma Miksasai. So before we go on, and we already said that we'll have to discuss this in the Gemara. This is the Gemara over here. And we spoke out in the intro, Mela by a pile that's not connected, they're not pressed together, they're not one unit. I remember the rules. Solid versus liquid. Liquids are one unit, even if it's a huge amount. If I have a vat, a yekef, and the vat there are 1 billion liters of oil,
Rabbi, why are they answering that it is fruit juice that's holding it? Why can't you just say there was no fruit juice and it's just not that tight? Why do we have to?
That's what I just said, Danny. You see clearly from our Gemara. The first time I learned about pressed cakes of figs, and I know I'm not exceptional over here, is that the first Gemara that I learned was Elam Metzias in Bava Metzia, and one of the items the Mishnah speaks about was the pressed. I remember hearing it when I was a kid the first time, and yeah, nowadays, the way they preserve,
especially because it's dried figs,
when
right?
you dried, exactly,
figs.
they would have these round kalim, and they would insert in it figs, and they would get pressed. It's a pressed cake of figs, not the way Kevon's picture, not
Kevon. Put the picture I just posted.
In other words, Aviv, when things when things adhere, because they are, let me word it this way. If you pick up one end and the whole thing comes up, in many areas in halacha, it's considered one unit. And that's the whole point of the Gemara, it's not the normal pressed cake of figs. It's not that mechubar because they were pressed together. It's only connected because there is something gooky, some meipedas that's somehow holding them together to some level, and that's not a chibur. Okay.
But then is the fruit juice like put with is it put separately than with the, because if it's in the cake, then shouldn't that become amen?
It's not soaking. I think it's soaking like a liquid, like a soup.
Oh yeah, or even if there's like a little bit like after we put like glue.
So I think what you're onto is mamash what the Gemara is going to say. Let's remember the rule. You're not allowed to give min atoid ala tameh. We just established that this pressed cake, it's not so connected. It's connected by meipedes. So now the question is, well, if it's not that connected, then why should we not already view it as two different figs? And if it's not to be united, then some of it is tar, some of it is tummy. Well, go back to the rule. Ein toidemin min atoid ala tameh. No, it's connected, but not connected. We have to get into that. So look inside the top line in Daf Yud Zayin. Frag the Gemara ve'ein soifoi licholik v'lasoisoi shnayim. Even much better. I take back what I am. Much better, the Gemara's question. When you separate truma, how do you separate truma? So there is the regular way and the unusual way. You know what the regular way is? First, you physically take something in your hand, and then you declare this is a truma. Gavaldik. So what happens over here? I'm going to go back to what yes, because so now I have this pressed cake of figs. Some of it is tar, some of it is tameh. Okay, I'm going to take off from the tar. The moment I did it, what do I have in my hand? I have a fig. Let's say this fig represents 2% of this big vat that's all pressed together, all together. Now I have tar and tameh that are not together. How can I now say on that which I have in my hand that you are truma for everything? It's no longer one unit. That's the way we're going to learn the Gemara's kasha here. The ein soifei licholik v'lasoisei shnayim. So therefore, we have to limit the rule of the Mishnah. It must be tiftar, interpret taich shekara l'shem b'mechubar, that the way the person is being mafresh truma is not that you physically take something and then make a declaration before you physically separated it in order to give it to the kohen. Before you did that, you verbally made a declaration that's called your kara shame. And you said, and the way we do it right now is you speak about what part of it. The top part to the east, sometimes people actually give directions on top of their keli. But you clearly state what from what part of this in front of you will become truma. First, so when you made the declaration, which actually imbued that part with kedushas truma, it was connected. And now you separate. It must be only in that case are you allowed to do it. And we're going to go me'inyan le'inyan. Now, what was the third case in the Mishnah? The second case, licha, was agudah shel yerek, have a bundle of vegetables. So says the Gemara that our Mishnah must be, listen to this, that shenitmeis v'oida agudah. That first it was made into a bundle. It's important. First it was made into a bundle. And after it was bundled together, that some part of it acquired tuma. If it would have acquired tuma before it being bundled, and then we already would have had the halacha that you cannot be toid min hatoid ala tameh, then bundling it together, there's a lot of lumdus here, even though it's a few words. You can't bundle it together and say, well, now that it's bundled together, now I can be toid min hatoid ala tameh. No. No, but if only when first you had the bundle. And by the way, the same thing has to be by the figs. First you had the unit. Now some part of it acquired tuma. Since from the beginning, from when it acquired tuma, it was already all min hamukav together. Now you can separate min hatoid ala tamei. Avol nitmeis kolachin. If first the stalk or more, some of the stalks became tummy, and then va'agodon, and then you bundled it, and now you want to say, well, the Mishnah says now that it's all bundled together, I can be toidim min hatoid ala the loy bidah. Loy bidah means now you cannot apply this. Gavaldik. They have to from
Go
go ahead.
In that case, can't you just take some of that, the Torah part that you're saying you can't, just make it tamei, and now you're good. Now you could do tamei on tamei.
You're not allowed to do that. Very good. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that, and that's actually why we learn so many times. Just whoever didn't hear, Danny's saying, you know what the solution would be? I mean, make everything tamei. I mean, tamei ala tamei. Not Rab Nechemia. No, you can't be metama. One of the reasons why the bakers, we learned that bakers amaratzim, they would hire chavedim to be kneaders because from when you want to make sure that it's done betara in order to be able to be mafresh challah betara. Even though you're making the flour tamei before there was a chiyuv, we don't do that. Okay.
The flour is put in a container. It's also like a bundle.
Okay, so it's flour. You don't separate truma from flour. The truma has to be separated way earlier. But then the Sanal is saying good. If you didn't separate truma from the meruach, you're ready up to the flour. You have to separate truma now. So maybe if after they were in a container, now some of it became tamei, I don't know how it would become tamei. It's only if the kernels became wet before. Okay, yeah, could be. Look inside the maraful, the 10 lines from the top. Shenetmeis va'oida aguda avolim nitmu eze kolachem v'achar kach oigdan ein toirim min atoid ala tamei the shuv havale ki ilu ze oimed la'atzmei v'ze oimed la'atzmei. Here again, by the bundle, again, the Gemara says, who cares if it became tummy when it was already bundled? The same question we had before. Normally, hafrashas truma means you're mafreshid b'maisa. Then you make a verbal declaration. If you first removed some of the toid, now that it's removed, now it's not in the same bundle. So the ein soifel lecholik alasi shnayim. So here also, tiftar, you have to interpret it. Shekara l'sheim b'mechubar. Only then are you allowed to use this exception. First Kriya Shem, and then the actual separation. Okay. Now comes this is a typical Talmudic question. What happens if you had a bundle? After it was bundled, a few stalks became tamei. Listen to this, Aviv. After that happened, some genius, before you took off Truma, untied the bundle. Now someone retied the bundle. This second bundle had before it some of it tamei. There was a precedence of tuma prior to the second bundling, but you can argue that the second bundling was just redoing the first bundling. Do you say that what? That this is a new one, or is it chayzer v'neyer? We're connected to God. We're disconnected from God. We become tamei. We reconnect to God. I think two levels of tshuva. Are you new or are you going back to the old? Is it chadish yomenu kikedem? You tell some people chadish yomenu kikedem to say they don't want to go back to the kedem. They don't want the old. They don't want to go back to the old. The old was never good enough. You want something better. Interesting. Now, again, a typical kasha. The Mishnah gave 3 exceptions. They all shared the same logic. Let's go with the logic. The reason why ain't tarmin because mina mukaf. They are anyways mukafed. So why did the Mishnah have to give 3 examples? Or and velitnei aguda velitnei areima. Answers the Gemara. If the Mishnah only would have given the first And we would have said that eagle shekule guf echad toidim. I get why there is an exception by the pressed, even though we just said that they're not mamish pressed, but they're sticky together, they're stuck together because of some mepetis. Therefore, they're considered one unit. They're more one unit. But when it comes to an aguda, a bundle is not one unit. It's only something external tied around it. She'ena kula guf echad, maybe eina toidim. Right? So therefore, hevet tzoircha misnei aguda. So the Mishnah went from the least chiddush to the bigger chiddush. Not only is the exception by the eagle, even by the aguda. And let's go to the next. The next is even better. You know why? Because by the aguda, at least there is a rope tied around the vegetables. When it comes to the pile of grain, there is no rope, you said before, a container. There's no container. It's laying on the ground, and there's just a pile. Again, at least aguda, here we go. Tefusa achas means, Aviv, that because of the rope, if you pick up one part of it, all of it goes with you. So that's why they're considered one unit. If you seize one part, if you teufus one part, your teufus, you move it all. But arema, since it's just in a pile, if you were to grab some of the kernels, you wouldn't schlep anything else along with it. So therefore, have a tzorcha misnei eagle, v'tzorcha misnei aguda, v'tzorcha misnei arema. You know how the
Why not just a pile?
That's it. See, Danny,
When
you learn Bavli, the Gemara right away would have says they didn't go so much back and forth to Yerushalmis. Because they understood that's the way it works. You introduce a concept, you build it up, and then you extend it even to there and even to there. The Babylonians had a different way of thinking. They felt, and that's why whoever learns Gemara in Yeshiva and Talmud Bavli, they say that's not an answer, that's the kasha. Because in Talmud Bavli, right away, the Gemara would have asked, well, so let the Mishnah only say Arema. It's very rare that we say Vizu. It's very rare that. It's a different way of learning. And you know what? It's good to learn like the Yerushalmis. That's the way you should teach them. You begin with the least novelty. Once the person chaps, they won't push back on you because it's one thing, it's one piece, it's stuck together. Yeah, the simplest. Then you'll
say that grain is usually it's meant to be baked together into one unit, so then it's considered more connected. But figs are really separate things.
That's the chiddush of the Gabbai. Not only does he know the kasha, he already knows the answer. I know 100%. Good, very good. Exactly. The Gemara would have said it. I think to learn from the Yerushalmi that sometimes getting too nitty-gritty is not healthy. I know many people that react that way. When you have a person that learns a lot of Gemara, they become very, they can become a nudnik for the non-Talmudists. Okay. Yeah, stop splitting hairs. Splitting hairs is a chachman. Splitting hairs is an illness. You have to know where to apply it. Who was the Amoyed that got kicked out of the Beis Medrash? Remember, I think it was by the roosters. That if a rooster is within 50 amas of hens, then we say that they were impregnated. And he asked the kasha, what happens if 1 foot was within 50 amas and 1 foot of the chicken was outside the 50 amas? There was one point where someone asked that question, and the Gemara says they kicked him out of the Beis Medrash. So asks Tosfos, there are many Gemaras that ask such questions.
It was annoying.
Huh?
It was very annoying.
It was very annoying, but you get used to it. Okay. Now,
Wait, Robert, did it ever answer about the tying and untying bundle?
no, there's no answer. The Gemara loves asking questions that are left dafka unanswered. It wants you to think. The Yerushalmi was that way. It didn't develop it all the way to the end. It brings up something and you work it out. Okay. Says the Gemara. Asks the Gemara. Final shtickle today. Mikiven de taninan hoyo shnei igulim. Ushnei agudais. Ushnei aremois. Now, it's a little bit tricky how to read the Gemara right now. If you remember, I want to go back just to the Mishnah. The Mishnah actually said, after it gave the 3 exceptions, the Mishnah sent the other side. Now, what happens if you have 2 pressed figs, or if you have 2 bundles, or if you have 2 piles? There, you cannot be toidim mafresh min atoid alatami. And what the Gemara is basically asking is that why did the Mishnah have to say it in both directions? You could have actually, if you wanted to say the final statement, only say the final statement. That if you have two pressed figs, you can't take one from the other. Which implies if you only have one, you could take it from it to it. Or just write what we learned until now, that you have an exception. When you have one cake, a pressed, one eagle, you can take from one part on the other. From that, you can extrapolate that if you have two separated pressed, and one of them is Torah, one of them is Tameh, you cannot take from one on the other. The Mishnah seems to be saying the same thing in both directions. Now, the next words, the Gemara takes out, let me just read it. And therefore, since the Mishnah gives the other side, that if you have two igulim or two agudas, then the Mishnah says you're not allowed to separate from the Tahir one on the Tameh one. Ma tzorcha dahi, the Ma Rabbi Yochanan b'shem Rabbi Yanai, our sugya began by quoting Rabbi Yochanan b'shem Rabbi Yanai, who told you the source. And like we said, according to the Rash, it's an asmachta. Why may you not take min ha-Torah ala Tameh? What's the scriptural either source or demis? So since the Torah puts together goyden min dogen min ha-goyden and mileya min ha-yekev, and I'm going back to the words of the Gemara that my yekev. If you remember, yekev means a vat in which you have wine. Efsher, the Gemara says, sheyia miksasei tamei or miksasei tahor, no such a mitzias. Af goyden, even though by the goyden it's efsher, that some of it is tar, some of it is tamei. And remember the words that we learned, lemei them efsher, mishi efsher. Now, why did we b'chlal bring the source here in the Gemara? If you look inside the Biur Hagra, all the way in the bottom of your Gemara, Matzoircha is his girsa. It didn't fit. He said, why did the Mishnah have to give the other side of the same rule? You could give from one cake. You can't give from one cake on the other. You could give from one bundle. It's automatically. You say either one side or the other. So he deletes. He goes from matzoircha. If you look inside the Gra, that was his girsa. And right away to the answer. We're going to go right away to the answer. Answer is the Gemara Amar Abchia bar Adam. This is beautiful. Ba'arema shal kishuyin v'diluyin he masnisam. In other words, what were to happen? The Mishnah gave an example of a pile of grain. What were to happen if you have a pile of kishuyin, either meaning cucumbers or kishuyin? We have this in Kilayim a lot. Kishuyin, they're melons, a certain type of non-sweet melon, or gourds or diluyin. Now, guys, kernels are too small. All right, they're very little. You don't take one at a time. You take a bunch together. So when they are in one pile, the Mishnah says they're considered one unit. You could take one on the other. Maybe that's only by grain. Without the Mishnah speaking about the other side, you would have wondered what happens if you have a pile of cucumbers, a pile of melons, items that even though they are piled, you normally never view them as one unit, because when you take them one at a time. Maybe even though they are already piled, you should not be allowed to give it. So that's why the Mishnah says that if you have two piles, you cannot give one on the other. It's taka extra to tell you that if it's in one pile, even if it's not only the example of the Mishnah, even if you have large items, even over there, if they are in one pile, yes, we view them as a single entity. And yes, you are allowed to give min hator al hatam.